House will come to order. Members, please take your seats. Sergeant Arms.
The House is now in session. All persons not entitled to privileges on the floor, please retire to the gallery.
The members will rise and be led in prayer by the Reverend Joseph A. Keaton, pastor of the Central Baptist Church in Roanoke, and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, led by the gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
May we pray. Almighty and ever-living God, we yield unto Thee most high praise and hearty thanks for the wonderful grace as well as the virtue to all those who love Thy name. We thank You for this assembly of choice vessels of the Commonwealth State of Virginia who come from all sections of the great state to legislate laws which improve the well-being of all the residents of our Commonwealth. We now beseech of Thee wisdom, guidance, and Your presence in order that this God-given task may be done to Your satisfaction and to Your glory. Furthermore, we ask through Your blessings that Virginia may continue to be a state that offers to her citizens equity, prosperity, and peace. Bless now this session to look well into the future and legislate laws which will be a blessing to generations to come. We ask in Thy matchless name. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The members will answer the roll call by indicating their presence on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker, a quorum is present.
Pursuant to House Rule 3, I've examined and approved the Journal of the House of Delegates for February 2nd, 2016. Motions and resolutions under Rule 39 are now in order. Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
Not at this time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for 3 introductions and a point of personal privilege. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, joining us in the gallery today, we have a number of people from Virginia 21, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that energizes and engages young adults in the political process. Virginia 21 seeks to teach young people the importance of leadership in solving the biggest challenges of our future and equip them with the tools to meet those challenges effectively. They're around the Capitol today. I'm not sure they all have gotten into the gallery, but they're out here talking about things that are most important to young voters, including safe campuses, college accessibility and affordability, and a thriving economy. So I hope that we can first welcome the students from Virginia 21 to the Capitol today. Second, Mr. Speaker, I do see students from the Renaissance School. They're up there in the gallery right there, and they're going to stand up so we can all see them. The Renaissance School is in Charlottesville, and you need to give me a time to talk about how good they are, you know. And they're here with their advisor and teacher, Anna Minutella. And the Renaissance School is a college preparatory high school for high-ability students in the arts, sciences, and humanities. School focuses on interdisciplinary learning through a balanced program, equally strong in arts and academics. So I hope that we can give a warm welcome to the students from the Renaissance School and their teachers. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I know these folks are trying to get into the gallery. They're kind of in the back there, and they can probably hear me, so they're outside. I'm happy to welcome today to the House and the Capitol students from the Tandem Friends School of Charlottesville, Virginia. Tandem is rooted in Quaker values and prepares young people for higher education and to lead fulfilling lives of integrity, creative expression, and service. Tandem has been in existence for 45 years, and today the students and teachers from Tandem are here to talk with their legislators about the environment, living the Quaker commitment to responsible stewardship of the earth. So even though they're not in the gallery, they will hear you when you clap. I hope you give a warm round of applause and welcome to the Tandem Friends Schools students. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, yesterday I listened intently to the gentleman from Fairfax as he discussed the Republican agenda on jobs. And it was good to take a look at the press release and look at a lot of the, I think, a number of good bills that have been offered from the Republicans on this issue. And of course, we have a number of good bills on our side that speak to this issue as well. It should be a bipartisan issue, and it's our hope over here that we can work together to find common ground on this most important issue to all of us, because it's only when we find common ground that we will really be able to move the Commonwealth forward. Now, I want to emphasize a couple of things as we think about these bills coming forward. First, we are, I think, all about building the new Virginia economy. Our governor has not just been talking about this, he's been out and about promoting this and doing this, whether it's in Virginia, overseas, in other states. Wherever a job can be found to be brought to Virginia, our governor has been there, and he's about making it happen. There are hundreds of announcements, as you've known, over the last several months and year, thousands of jobs, and millions of dollars in private capital investment that are coming to Virginia or that are part of businesses expanding in Virginia. So first, that's a good thing, building the new Virginia economy. Secondly, and this I took away from the gentleman from Fairfax, when he said, the status quo in this world no longer works. We have to try some new things. Sequestration looms, and it's going to have a huge impact on the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that is why we cannot say that the problems that exist for us now are because of Governor McDonnell or because of Governor McAuliffe. The problems that exist in the Commonwealth of Virginia are largely being created by the problems in Washington, D.C. and sequestration. But that doesn't help us. We have got to move beyond the status quo and reliance on Washington, D.C., and look for ways that we can work together to create the incentives to build that new Virginia economy. That includes targeted incentives tied to performance. We're not just going to throw money at problems, we're going to tie them to performance. Workforce credentialing that is tied to a job. Reinvestment in higher education that is targeted to the commercialization of ideas that go into the private sector. And regional initiatives like the Go Virginia initiative that I think is a bipartisan initiative that a lot of us support, that is designed to harness the brain power of higher education with the regional talent in our regions to build new economies regionally. We got good bills on the Democratic side and good bills on the Republican side, and we can build on that. And finally, we have to remember we all have roles in this process. The governor has a role, the legislature has a role. We have bills on both sides that we can work together to get things done. We have a budget to pass that sets the table to make this happen. I hope we can work together to move towards building that new Virginia economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon, the House Appropriations Committee will discuss and debate Go Virginia, which the minority leader just talked about. And I'm sure everyone is somewhat familiar with Go Virginia. There have been several major news stories. The governor mentioned in his State of the Commonwealth address. The minority leader has spoken about it 2 or 3 times. I'm privileged to have the gentleman from Prince William, Delegate Luke Torian, who's my chief co-patron. But today I want to address Go Virginia in some detail because you've heard a lot about it, so what does it really do? And let me give you sort of the thesis statement if you'll listen carefully. I think it sums it up pretty good. Go Virginia is a major bipartisan business-led initiative to align the business community, and that's the key, the higher education community, state government, and local government in order to foster private sector growth, strengthen our workforce, promote local collaboration, and maximize our economic development resources. The problem. Virginia faces 2 interconnected challenges on economic development. One, minority leader talked about slow economic recovery and lack of growth, and we can talk about sequestration, a bunch of other things. But number 2, significant growth in economic development spending with legitimate questions about its return, some good, some bad. Virginia's economy is recovering more slowly than the national economy. We've heard it many times. 2014, 0% growth, 48 out of 50 states, and falling to 12th in the CNBC top states for business rankings. And this is just not acceptable. Last week, the Appropriations Committee, under the leadership of Chairman Jones, received a report detailing the incredible growth in economic development spending, $679 million since 2010. Incentives have grown by 298% since 2004. We heard a lot about the Appomattox deal and the need in some cases for increased scrutiny. And we have to ask, is the money we spent worth it, and do we vet things properly? I've been in appropriations for, 14 or 15 years now. One of the things that we see often is what I call the flavor of the month. Folks will bring proposals that have buzzwords, workforce, STEM, the latest one is cybersecurity, and those things are good in themselves. But just because someone says it doesn't mean that particular proposal has been well vetted. And so how do we address the 2 problems I just talked about? How to create the environment for real long-term economic growth, not just any job, but stable jobs with good paychecks, jobs for all children in the fields of the future, and how do we maximize our economic development investments? Just not another incentive program, real investment with a real return, and accountability to protect taxpayers. And that answer is Go Virginia. Before we talk about the legislation, let me tell you why this concept is different and why it's receiving so much attention. Go Virginia is unique for 2 reasons. First, Go Virginia is business-led. If you talk to a lot of the businessmen, they will tell you this. They've been AWOL. They sort of depended on a very good economy the last 10 years. It was driven by defense spending. It was driven by other things, but that, of course, is all gone. You know, I think down here we think we have a lot of good ideas. I certainly think I've had a lot. We have a lot of smart people, but we're not smart enough to solve this on our own. Go Virginia is a result of work done by some of the most prominent business leaders, the W. Wins and the Tom Farrells, but also the Mary Millers, a small businesswoman from Blacksburg, who really did a wonderful job of testifying today in the subcommittee. And they are not alone. NFIB, the voice of small business, 8,000 individuals have joined the Go Virginia Coalition, 80 statewide and regional business and education organizations. And here's the key. These are people that create jobs every day in the Commonwealth. And they have brought this idea to us and said, this is what we need. Go Virginia is not just another incentive program. Unlike other incentive programs, which are top-down, driven toward one purpose or one goal, lack accountability or real measures, Go Virginia will build from the bottom up. All the stakeholders will be at the table. There will be real flexibility to identify the projects needed in each region that foster real long-term economic growth. And Go Virginia isn't just about handing out grants to companies. There will be real accountability. There will be metrics with every project. There will be clawback provisions. And as a matter of fact, if the project's not working, the project can be stopped. And if a local region actually bubbles up a project that the state board doesn't think is good enough, they'll send it back down to make sure it's more vetted. So let me talk a little bit about how it works. There are 2 major pieces of legislation. My bill establishes the Growth and Opportunity Board and Go Grants. Chairman Hugo's bill encourages regional collaboration. My bill builds the Go Virginia system from the bottom up. It starts by establishing 8 to 10 regional councils. Once again, these are made up primarily of business leaders, but it also have local government leaders, education institutions, and economic development leaders. The council is not a new bureaucracy. Whenever you hear the word regionalism, rightly, a lot of people get scared. They think of higher taxes, they think about more bureaucracy. This is exactly the opposite. This is voluntary. But the key to life is, and most businesses will tell you, is they don't locate with a political subdivision. When they come, they're looking at workforce, they're looking at how good that workforce is. A lot of their suppliers are in the region. A lot of your constituents might live in one locality and travel to another one. And so they will tell you that if you don't do it regionally, it will not work. The council, the local councils have a few key responsibilities. They assess the region needs, they identify the sectors or areas where there's opportunity for growth, and they identify workforce training needs. And very quickly on that, the local council will draw a strategic roadmap. For example, it might be your region, advanced manufacturing is the roadmap. Other regions, advanced manufacturing might not work. If advanced manufacturing is your roadmap, do you have the skilled workforce to stand that up? They'll do a skills gaps analysis to see exactly what the workforce is. Then the council can apply for startup grants. And let me please make sure I emphasize this. These are not long-term. Recurring funds to run a new program. These are funds meant to get a project off the ground. From there, the projects are sent to a business-led state board called the Growth and Opportunity Board. 21 members, legislative, gubernatorial, but the key, 11 business representative, the chairman's a businessman, and a majority of the council must vote the project. So that's, I think, very important. Finally, a portion of the funds available to the board will be sent to regional councils based on population. So a lot of regions would go, and I know some of our rural areas will get cut out. These grants will go to the big boys who will come up with the better proposals. The way Go Virginia works is part of the grants are per capita and only that region will get them. Some are competitive, so you can go and combine regions, you can go interstate and come up with some proposals. So I think that's very, very important. Let me give you a quick example. Last week, Delegate Yancey came to the Appropriations Committee, which what I thought was a good idea. And here is a quick background. Newport News Public Schools operate the Denby High School Aviation Academy. 340 students enrolled in the Aviation Academy. It's a STEM-based program. That's an existing program. The school system leases 28,000 square feet of space from the Williamsburg Airport. Newport News Public Schools and the airport are proposing a new academy. They want to call it the Virginia Center for Aeronautics. They want to double the size of the building, add a 10,000 square foot aircraft hangar. It'd be the largest aviation high school in the United States. The goal is to become a workforce development and training center in a fast-growing field. It would bring together business, education, and manufacturing. Now, Delegate Yancey was upstairs asking for a $3.5 million budget amendment for this concept. But think about it. You've been upstairs before on the 9th floor. We do our best, but we might be doing 20 and 30 and 40 budget amendments a day. So we listen quickly, and of course, we're going to the next budget amendment. And that's very frustrating for some of y'all. What an ideal project to send to a regional council, have it vetted, sounds very good to me, had it tweaked, and then if that comes up through the system, then that is a very, very viable project. So finally, this is what Go Virginia can do. It can bring to life real projects that will have a real long-term impact. They can be vetted, they can be held accountable, but most importantly, they can move forward quickly. The second bill is Chairman Hugo's bill, which is House Bill 846. This works as companion to my legislation and incentivizes localities to work together to attract new business investment. A lot of times we know this, two localities will both compete for the same project. This bill will allow them to work together. In exchange, they will get a portion of the tax revenue and send it back as grant funding. There are requirements like local government cost sharing, a minimum number of jobs, and a concrete plan to use the funds. So that's a little bit about Go Virginia, and I know it was long. But the reason why I want to make sure that you understand it, I do think it's totally new from what we've been doing. We must have 20, 30 different silo types of funds and incentives up in appropriations. We need to come up with something that is more coherent, that down the road we can funnel other projects and other funds to. So, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to having the Go Virginia bill up in appropriations today, and hopefully you'll soon see it on the floor.
Thank you. The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for purpose of a request.
Gentleman may state it.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the Journal would reflect that my seatmate, the gentleman from Chesapeake, is absent today due to the press of personal business.
Journal will so reflect. The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib.
Speaker, I rise for a request and an introduction.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I request that the Journal reflect that my seatmate, the gentleman from Loudon, is away to pressing personal business.
Journal will so reflect.
And Mr. Speaker, the introduction, everybody in this body is familiar with Model General Assembly. You've also met some folks from Faith Christian School in Roanoke in the past. The group that's going to be going to the Model General Assembly this year is here today, walking the halls, learning what we do in preparation for their time at Model General Assembly. Our esteemed clerk, Gary Nardo, will be especially pleased to know that the Model General Assembly House Clerk is with us today. So, Mr. Speaker, if the House would give the kids from Faith Christian a warm House welcome.
Delighted to have the students here from Faith Christian Church. The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Villanueva.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for an introduction.
The gentleman has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, today we have with us representatives from NASA Langley Research Center, Wallace Flight Facility, and the aerospace industry of the Commonwealth. The aerospace industry has a huge impact on the Commonwealth, and we want to thank these folks for coming to Richmond to be part of the legislative process. Please join them tonight over at the Virginia Library for their legislative reception. In addition, we have astronaut Mike Hopper Hopkins, who was on board the International Space Station and who flew expeditions 37 and 38. Ladies and gentlemen, give them a galactic General Assembly welcome. Please stand up there.
We're pleased to have the visitors with us today, and we thank you for coming to share your time with us in the Capitol. The gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for two introductions.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us in the gallery today are members of the American Association of University Women of Virginia. They're visiting as part of their annual state lobby day. Since 1881, AAUW has been one of the nation's leading voices promoting equity for women and girls through advocacy, education, philanthropy, and research. The first AAUW branch in Virginia was established here in Richmond in 1909, and since then the organization has grown to 26 branches and almost 23,000 branch and national members throughout the Commonwealth, with 170,000 members and supporters nationwide. AAUW members have been meeting today with lawmakers on a variety of issues, including legislation to eliminate the gender pay gap, to build on our landmark human trafficking legislation passed last year by adding measures to assist victims of human trafficking, especially minors, to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, and to increase transparency in our legislative process. I applaud members of AAUW for the important contribution they make to our Commonwealth and ask that you join me in granting them a warm welcome.
Pleased to have the ladies with us today, and thank you for all that you do for the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also joining us today are members of the Virginia Women's Equality Coalition, here for their Advocacy Day. The Women's Equality Coalition believes women and girls everywhere deserve an equal opportunity to participate fully in civic, economic, and political life, irrespective of race, class, income, immigration status, involvement with the criminal justice system, disability, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The 13-member coalition includes a wide variety of organizations who advocate for women's rights, health care, immigrant and minority rights, voting rights, and much more. and I ask that we grant them a warm house welcome.
Pleased to have the visitors with us today. It's a nice wave you gave there. It's good. Gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for requests.
So may stated.
Speaker, could, on page 26, House Bill 1147 go by until Monday, February the 8th?
Without objection, House Bill 1147, by until Monday, February 8th. The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Torian.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise for an introduction and also a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, today we are delighted to have with us in the gallery the Prince William County chapter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. The National Coalition of 100 Black Women is a nonprofit volunteer organization dedicated to community service, advocacy, leadership development, and the enhancement of gender and racial equality for Black women and girls. In 2013 and 2015, the chapter was awarded a grant by Centennial Hospital and the Potomac Hospital Foundation to support educational awareness campaigns on the prevalence of triple-negative breast cancer and prostate cancer in the African American community. As a result, the partnership was formed with 10 African American churches in Prince William County and Stafford County to expand awareness about these diseases. On this Saturday, February the 6th, the chapter will receive the 2016 Keeper of the Community Award at the Fort Myers Memorial Chapel in Arlington, Virginia. Please join me in welcoming to this chamber the Prince William County chapter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women.
I'm delighted to have the women from Prince William with us today, and we thank you for all that you do for your community and for our Commonwealth.
And Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
May proceed.
Today is the third day as we recognize Black History Month here in the chamber. And I want to take a moment and address a subject matter that perhaps I haven't heard since I've been here in the 6 years, and that is the issue of faith and clergy who have served here in this chamber over the years. So I want to kind of remind you a little bit of some of the men who have served here in this chamber and perhaps from some of the districts that you represent today. All of us are people of faith. Faith plays an intricate role in what we do here in this chamber. Robert McPhee Brown stated the following: "Any Christian worth his salt knows that in this day and age, there is an imperative laid upon him to be politically responsible. When one considers the fateful decision which lies in the hands of the politicians and the impact which these decisions will have for good or evil upon the destinies of millions of people, it becomes apparent that in terms of trying to implement the will of God, however fragmentarily, politics can be a means of grace." And I emphasize that again. Politics can be a means of grace. Some of the clergymen who have served in this esteemed house, the Reverend Charles E. Hogans was born in 1819. He served in the Virginia House of Delegates, representing Norfolk County and Portsmouth from 1869 to 1871. The Reverend Miles Connors was a farmer and minister born a slave in Norfolk County in the early 1930s. He represented Norfolk County in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1875 to 1877, serving on the House Militia and Police Committee. The Reverend Cecil Perkins was born a slave in 1839 in Buckingham County. He entered politics and represented Buckingham County in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1869 to 1871, and Buckingham County and Cumberland County from 1887 to 1888. The Reverend Guy Powell was born a slave in 1851 in Brunswick County. Reverend Powell represented Brunswick County in the House of Delegates from 1881 to 1882. The Reverend Ellis Wilson, a farmer and a minister, was born in Dinwiddie County in 1824. He represented the county in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1869 to 1871. And some of our contemporaries today who have served in the Virginia House: the Honorable Walter Henry Maxwell, pastor of Ivory Baptist Church in Newport News, served in the House from 1982 to 1992. The Honorable Dwight Jones, pastor of the First Baptist Church of South Richmond, served from 1994 to 2009. And my colleague and contemporary today, the Honorable Dolores McQuinn, Associate Minister of the Mount Olivet Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. Mr. Speaker, we come here with this scripture in mind. Micah tells us, "He has shown you, O mortals, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Ms. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of introduction. Excuse me.
Gentlewoman has floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed my pleasure today to recognize in the gallery the members of the League of Women Voters of Virginia. The League of Women Voters of Virginia has been working for 96 years to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. 12 local leagues concentrate on local issues, and the State League is very present on statewide issues. A small personal note, for 15 years they were very definitely my mentor, and I would share with the body that the difference between consensus spelled with an S and consensus spelled with a C. Consensus is spelled with an S, and that's what the League of Women Voters does. It tries to get the sense of the organization on any given issue when they ultimately take a position. It's not census as in counting people, but it is what we have been talking about more frequently. I was pleased to note this session about coming together in agreement and reasoning together on what the best solution would be. In that tradition, the League has taken a number of positions on anything from sewage treatment to obviously education funding, and their signature issue, of course, on all levels revolve around support of fair and open voting processes. I hope that if there are any members in the gallery that they will stand so that we can give them a warm house welcome.
Very pleased to have the visitors with us today, and we thank you for taking time to come to the Capitol. Gentleman from Henrico, Mr. O'Bannon.
Speaker, I rise for one brief introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, sir. I hope the General Assembly and the House will welcome the Virginia Assisted Living Association today. These good folks have a Capitol Hill Day. They're a nonprofit. They represent big and small industries. We all know somebody in an ALF, Mr. Speaker, and this is the set of folks that represent 12,000 residents in these 165 assisted living. So I hope we'll give them a house welcome. If they're in the gallery, I'll ask they stand.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an announcement and a motion.
Gentleman may proceed.
First, the announcement, Mr. Speaker. The annual Super Bowl celebration hosted by Senator Wagner, Peterson, Cosgrove, and myself is this Sunday, February 7th. Kickoff 6:30 p.m. Doors open at 5:45 p.m. It's at the Virginia Auto Dealers Association. Just wanted to extend a bipartisan invite. It's potluck, so no need to report. So hope to see everyone there. Mr. Speaker, the motion. When
House floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
House will come to order.
I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the House Bill 90, which was engrossed and passed its third reading, for the purpose of an amendment.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Taylor, moves that having voted on the prevailing side by which we engrossed and passed the third reading, House Bill 90, we reconsider that vote. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the motion.
Well, it's already been passed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, Prince William, Mr. Lingenfeller.
Mr. Speaker, rise for a request and an announcement.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I request that the journal reflect that my seatmate and colleague, Delegate Anderson, is away on pressing personal business.
Journal will so reflect.
Mr. Speaker, rise for a announcement. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the Sportsman's Caucus will be meeting at 7 a.m. as we normally do, and I think this is going to be a really interesting presentation. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation, excuse me, will be coming in and is going to address the efforts that they have been doing in step with what the Commonwealth has been doing to restore oysters in the Chesapeake Bay. So if you have an interest in this and you have time on your schedule, I would encourage you to come and listen. This is the whole proposition of oysters and what's going on in the Bay is remarkable. It is a remarkable success story, and you ought to be aware of it because there's probably no one single species in the entire tributary that is more important to helping us use the sort of natural recuperative abilities of the ecosystem to clean the bay than the restoration of oysters. So I encourage you to be there if you can be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Roanoke City, Mr. Rasul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction and point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we were honored to be led in prayer by the Reverend Joseph Keaton, pastor of Central Baptist Church, where he has, if he'll rise, he has been the pastor there for over 20 years. He served Roanoke well. Central Baptist Church has served in the heart of Roanoke for over 100 years, just celebrating their centennial anniversary. And the best fact about Pastor Keaton is that he's an avid Redskins fan. That's right. If we can give him a warm house welcome. Now, Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege. Mr. Speaker, I rise to commend the Governor, Botetourt County, Delegate Austin, and RK Packaging on the economic development announcement last Friday. RK Packaging announced that it will invest $11 million to upgrade its equipment, bringing 50 very well-paying jobs to Botetourt County. RK Packaging provides cosmetic and pharmaceutical companies with highly creative and cost-effective packaging with cutting-edge technology. When RK's chairman and CEO spoke about his company's 20th anniversary in the Roanoke region, he noted when they first researched Virginia in 1996, they found it to be very appealing for its lower taxes, competitive business incentives, reduced energy costs, excellent schools, and the fact that it was a right-to-work state. That'll get you a couple of applause, right? Roanoke in particular attracted us with its vibrant community and the advantage of a strategically perfect location. I want to thank the Governor, Delegate Austin, Botetourt County, RK, on bringing these critical jobs to the region as we build this new Virginia economy.
The gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you. Today with us in the gallery, I have the pleasure of welcoming my friend, Claire Dwoskin. Will you stand up for us, Claire? Claire is today here in her role as a member of the Board of Visitors for George Mason University. She has been actively involved in our community for years and years as a child health advocate, a philanthropist, and a founder of the Children's Medical Safety Research Institute. She has been active and helped many organizations in our community and served on numerous boards, including those of higher education, for public libraries, public broadcasting, performing arts, and historic preservation. I am very pleased that she is here to visit with us and ask that the House give her a warm welcome.
Gentleman from Stafford, Mr. Dudenheffer.
Mr. Speaker, rise for an introduction.
Gentleman may proceed.
In the gallery or in the Capitol today, I'm not sure which, is a group of students from Germanna Community College who have been making their way around the Capitol today. I had a very nice conversation with them, and the conversation was mostly about workforce development, which I think is something that's very important to us and certainly important to Germanna Community College. Accompanying them was Miss Martha O'Keefe, who's the Associate Vice President of Workforce Development, and Mr. Eric Vanover, a Professor of History. I hope it will be I hope the House will join me in a warm House welcome. Thank you.
Delighted to have the students from Germanna here today. The gentleman from Washington, Mr. O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. Joining us today in the gallery is a group from Leadership Washington County, and I would ask that they please stand. And the group has made the 300-plus mile trip up to Richmond to visit with legislators, to tour the Capitol and various buildings here on Capitol grounds. And Leadership Washington County was established to unite individuals of diverse backgrounds and experiences who have demonstrated an interest, talent, and commitment to leadership and to increase participation in community service and develop a vision for Washington County among its participants. They make this trip up every year. They're here today with the group leader, Mr. Barry Fireball. So on behalf of Delegate Pillion and myself, I hope you will join with me in giving them a warm House welcome.
Pleased to have the members from Leadership Washington visiting with us today. The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Albo.
Speaker, announcement, please.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, for those of you who've been here for more than a year, you'll recognize this speech. And for those of you who are just brand new, want to explain something about how courts works with bills with fiscal impact. So in the old days, we in courts would pass every bill, no matter how much it cost, up to appropriations, and that created lots of problems for the appropriations people because then they had to vote no, not on the substance of the bill, but just based on money, and they didn't think that was very fair. So what we did was decided that we would just hold the bills in courts until we found out how much money was available for bills with fiscal impact, and then we would hear those bills. So if you have a bill that has fiscal impact and you are a Republican, I'd like you to go talk to Mr. Bell, Delegate Bell from Charlottesville, and tell him how bad you really, 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 really want your bill. And if you are a Democrat, your appointed contact is a gentlelady from, are you Annandale? Fairfax, Annandale, to talk about how you might want, really, really, really want your bill. And in the spirit of bipartisanship, because we are a touchy-feely group in courts, we always have a few bills for the Democrats and some bills for the Republicans. So it's not, I just want to make sure you all don't think there's some kind of secret mojo going on. Talk to Vivian and she'll be your spokesperson. And talk to Delegate Bell, he'll be your spokesperson, and don't talk to me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for two requests.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
First request is that I ask that House Bill 928 on page 14 go by for the day. Page 14.
Without objection, House Bill 928 by for the day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my second request is on page 14 again, HB 252. I request that that be moved to the regular calendar for purposes of a floor amendment.
Without objection, House Bill 252 to the regular calendar.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Norfolk, Mr. Lindsay.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for purposes of an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Today in the gallery or about the Capitol grounds are the ladies of the Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Zeta Phi Beta Sorority is an international, historically black Greek letter sorority founded on January 16, 1920 by 5 collegiate women at Howard University. Zeta Phi Beta was founded on a simple belief that sorority elitism and socialization should not overshadow the real mission for progressive organizations to address societal mores, ills, prejudices, poverty, and health concerns of the day. Zeta Day at the Capitol began when the late Senator Yvonne B. Miller invited her sorority sisters to witness the legislative process and meet with legislators. With us in the gallery today or about the grounds are the members of the Zeta Phi Beta sorority. Mr. Speaker, I hope it will be the will of this body to grant these ladies a warm house welcome.
We're delighted to have the member from the sorority with us today. Thank you for taking the time to come to the Capitol. The gentlewoman from Bedford, Ms. Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is my 18th session here at the General Assembly. And I've heard a lot of speeches from this House floor. So I spent a lot of time in preparing the message that I was going to give today because I knew that, one, if I wanted you to grasp it, that I would need to try to keep your attention at the same time, too. So hopefully, at least for a couple minutes, I have your attention because this is an issue that I hope to leave you with a better understanding of. At 8:30 tomorrow morning, the House Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions will hold a public hearing on one of the most pressing issues facing Virginia's families today, and that's the rising cost of health care. As chairman of the Health Insurance Reform Commission, this is an issue about which I have heard an awful lot over the last several years. From monthly premiums that have risen far beyond what was promised when the Affordable Care Act was approved, to deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses for families. And next year, it'll be over $7,000 for one person out of pocket. The expense of health care has affected my constituents and the people of Virginia in a very big way. Things have changed dramatically with Obamacare. As we see more high-deductible health care plans, consumers are becoming more informed about the care they seek, where they seek it, and how much they pay for it. While the commission I chair has heard much about the problem of health care costs, solutions have been in much shorter supply. Last year, there were several bills to reform Virginia's COPN laws. We are not alone. Other states began debating their COPN, known as Certificate of Public Need, and news stories started regularly appearing about these laws and their effects on healthcare choices and costs. In studying these laws, the Mercatus Center at George Mason University concluded COPN laws limit competition, diminish access to care, and contribute to rising healthcare costs. They are not alone in reaching that conclusion. the Federal Trade Commission and the United States Department of Justice's Antitrust Division have both concluded that COPN laws limit consumer choice and stifle innovation. That is not a position they reached just recently either. The FTC told Virginia it supported the complete elimination of COPN laws 29 years ago in 1987. This is why they have urged states like Virginia to reconsider whether retaining these laws best serve their citizens' health care needs. Virginia adopted its COPN laws in 1973. At that time, the federal government began requiring states to adopt such regulations in an attempt to control the rising costs of health care. Back then, the federal government reimbursed providers on a cost-plus basis. You can guess what incentive that created. Build it, bill it, and get paid for it, plus a percentage of profit margin on top of that. Eventually, the federal government changed the way it reimbursed for health care, and in the early 1980s, it repealed the mandate that states have to have COPN laws. Why did the federal government do this? Because it realized that COPN laws were not controlling costs. Fast forward 30 years later, Virginia still has a robust COPN program on the books. The last time we had a significant debate about COPN was 16 years ago. This year, we have a real opportunity to reform a system that is not keeping up with the changing healthcare marketplace. When it comes to the debate over the Commonwealth Certificate of Public Need program, there are two main arguments made by the supporters of the existing law. First, preserve the status quo to ensure market dominance. Why wouldn't you want to preserve the status quo when you're the only game in town? When there is one game in town, that entity controls what it charges. When competition enters the market, prices fall and patients benefit. The second argument, charity care and cherry picking, which has been addressed in the bills coming forward, requiring the same charity care from all competitors. The situation stifling competition has become more serious, not less, over the last decade. Consider these developments. Independent imaging services are being bought and owned by hospitals. Physicians' practices are being bought and owned by hospitals. 2/3 of health insurance providers are owned by the hospitals. Centera owns Optima. Inova in Total Health and Innovation Health, which just did a joint venture with Aetna. VCU Health System owns Virginia Premier. And Centra in my region owns Piedmont Healthcare Plans. Not only do they receive the protection of COPN regulations, but as a payer, they don't experience the same challenges in negotiating with health plans. Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan would fully understand this arrangement, and they would be envious. Because in this case, the monopoly is being provided with the assistance of government. We hear that hospitals are economic engines for our regions, and I definitely agree. Like any hospital, they and other providers should be allowed to deploy capital and put plans in place that are forward-thinking and long-term and not subjected to haphazard or inconsistent decisions made here in Richmond. But why do we have a system that allows such investments to be held hostage because two competing providers attempt to hold up each other's projects by opposing one another's applications and gaming the system? Government continues to protect their market share while they purchase more and more physician practices and reclassify them as outpatient facilities, which immediately triples the cost of the same services to the patients in your districts. It has another effect that is starting to concern local government. The accumulation of these properties by nonprofit hospitals are now tax exempt and removed from your local property tax revenues. So your patients have a larger share of tax liability to subsidize each of these deals as well. You might wonder why then, why has nothing been done to alleviate this expensive regulatory burden that thwarts competition, limits consumer choice, and stifles innovation? Well, just stop by tomorrow morning's hearing and you'll see why. There is no doubt in my mind that House Room D will be filled with and dominated by hospital employees, hospital administrators, doctors employed by hospitals, and an army of lobbyists being retained by the hospitals. They have every right to be there. Some of them are our friends. I am sure that whenever an effort is being made to bring real competition to any industry benefiting from a restricted market, everyone affiliated with the protected industry comes out in full force. But when you're looking around the committee room at all those attending that meeting to ensure their insulation from competition continues, I'd like you to think about those who are not there too. Think about your neighbor who could have received an MRI at a fraction of the cost from a facility other than that hospital. Think about your relative who might have been able to have an outpatient surgical procedure done at a significant savings by using an ambulatory surgery center. Think about a good friend who's battling cancer and their chemo treatments tripled because the hospital just purchased it and can now charge higher prices because they're an outpatient facility. Think about the independent doctors in your community who want to offer a lower cost treatment alternative to their patients, your neighbors, but have been thwarted by a system that requires tens of thousands of dollars just to overcome the regulatory hurdles associated with COPN. These are the people who have entrusted us to represent their best interests. They have not asked us to provide protection from favored firms at a higher price that they must bear. They are asking for any relief from the expense of a healthcare system that's largely uncompetitive and over-regulated. Our healthcare plan may insulate our wallets from the egregious expense of some services. Many of those we serve who have high deductibles and enormous out-of-pocket expenses are not so fortunate. The administrator of your local protected hospital may be one of your constituents, and a very well-compensated constituent at that. Your local hospital may employ hundreds more of your constituents who, despite support for their current employer, would also benefit from competition in their jobs. But in House Room D at 8:30 tomorrow morning, will the voices of all 80,000 of your constituents be equal in volume? Will the voices of those with limited health care choices be as loud as those who insist on preserving the very expensive status quo? As this debate continues, I ask all of you to hear the distant voices. Remember those who don't have the wherewithal to retain lobbyists or to take an unpaid holiday off from work to testify at a public hearing in Richmond. If we're ever going to alleviate their health care expenses, we must reform COPN, and we must act to reform it now. It'd be easy for us to say it's too complicated, and like my local hospital, support the status quo, but that's not in the best interest of the citizens in the region or in the Commonwealth. Admittedly, the healthcare industry is unique, both in the mandates government places on it and the economic protections like the COPN process bestowed on it. It seems to me that's all the more reason to find creative ways to increase access to healthcare for patients at a lower cost. There's nothing to prevent us from enacting responsible reform that protects charity care, and there is nothing other than pressure from the direct beneficiaries of this government protection to prevent us from making the long overdue changes that would increase consumer health care choice and lower health care costs. I realize I'm asking the members of this body to do something bold. Enacting changes to a system that's been in place for more than 40 years takes courage, but that's exactly what our constituents need. We don't need more studies. We've had plenty of those. We need action, and we need action now. We know what needs to be done. The American people are looking for elected leaders with the backbone and fortitude to fight for them and get things done. I ask all of you to join me and do just that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for an introduction.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, in the gallery today, we have representatives from the newly rechristened Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, and I'd ask them to rise. Mr. Speaker, the Northern Virginia Chamber, formerly Fairfax Chamber, has been the voice of business in Northern Virginia for over 90 years, representing 700 businesses and almost 500,000 employees. This chamber's board and executive leadership consists of prominent business leaders from across the Northern Virginia region, and they have joined us in Richmond today to advocate for pro-business policies that will ensure that the Commonwealth's economic engine, Northern Virginia, is strong for years to come. I hope my fellow members will join me in giving them a warm House welcome.
I'm pleased to have the members from the Northern Virginia Chamber with us, and we thank you for all that you do. The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Stolle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did not come with a prepared speech today, did not anticipate responding, but I felt driven to respond to what we just heard, the clarion cry for justice in Virginia. Let me speak a little bit to what the COPN process is and how we got to where we were. Or we are today. You all may recall that last year we had a similar issue come up with COPN. The chairman of HWI actually carried the bill that sent us got together a task force to take a look at COPN and determine on how we should reform it and move forward with that. That task force had industry leaders from across the state, not just in healthcare, but from all aspects of industry. They did their work. They had met several times during the year, and they came up with recommendations on how we should reform COPN. The biggest recommendations out of that committee was that we needed to have a task force that could set forward an analytic process to evaluate COPN and see what the impact of repealing certain services were. That was the number one issue out of that committee. The folks there said, we simply do not have enough information to make a decision on COPN reform or repeal and how it impacts our rural hospitals and our services provided throughout the Commonwealth. Some folks didn't get what they wanted out of that task force. They wanted more. And although we have a bill in that would take and meet all the specifications that task force put forward, including further task force to evaluate COPN services, they've put in several bills for repeal and calling that repeal reform. About half of our rural hospitals are currently operating in the red. We simply do not have the information to know what repeal of COPN will do to those hospitals. We have no analytic data. Those of you who were at the subcommittee last a week ago, heard me say that in medicine, our number one priority is to first do no harm. We simply cannot repeal COPN with any confidence that we will not be doing harm. I would encourage everyone to get behind a bill that would encourage reform of COPN to establish a task force that we can intelligently make a decision on repealing services and move that forward rather than voting for repeal of COPN. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The further motions or resolutions under Rule 39. If not, the clerk will call the calendar.
Calendar for the Virginia House of Delegates for Wednesday, February 3rd, 2016. House bills on third reading uncontested calendar. The 27 bills in the third reading uncontested block are as follows. House Bill 14, House Bills 24, 51, 65, 88, 104, 105. Page 4 of the printed calendar. House Bills 147, 205, 206, 233, 323, 456. Page 6. House Bills 470, 567, 649, 685, 790, 810. Page 8. House Bills 1011, 1051, 1052, 1145, 1175. Page 10, House Bills 1214, House Bill 1281, and House Bill 1330.
Shall the bills pass? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, no 0.
Ayes 97, no 0. The bills are passed.
Continuing with today's calendar, House bills on third reading regular calendar. Third reading regular calendar. House Bill 4.
Shall the bill pass? I'm sorry.
A bill to provide for the submission to the voters of a proposed amendment to the Constitution of Virginia, adding to Article 1, a section numbered 11A relating to the right to work.
Finished? Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 63, noes 34.
Ayes 63, noes 34. The bill is passed.
House Bill 90 has been moved to reconsider, and we'll take that up in second reading at the beginning of that section of the calendar. Accordingly, House Bill 158, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to grass cutting in certain counties.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 73, noes 24.
Ayes 73, noes 24. The bill is passed.
Turning to page 12 of the printed calendar, House Bill 198, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to application for special conservator of the peace by locality.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 0.
Ayes 97, noes 0. The bill is passed.
House Bill 254, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to technical adjustments of certain House of Delegates district boundaries.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak to the bill for just one second. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't remember the exact wonderful words I used during the veto session last year, but the current state of the law in Virginia that has not been successfully appealed or even appealed is that we do redistricting one time every 10 years under the Constitution, starting in 2011, and every 10 years after that. So I urge the body to vote no on this redistricting bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Spotsylvania, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
I'd just like to point out that it has been the common practice for decades that minor technical adjustments to districts has been conducted and allowed again for decades after redistricting has been done. This is done because of the problem with split precincts. At the same time we're doing redistricting up here, our local electoral boards and local governments are also doing their own redistricting and also changing precinct boundaries. So it's very common for us to end up with split precincts and split communities and split districts because there's three processes going on at once. And ever since I've been here and long before I got here, we've always made minor technical adjustments after the fact without any constitutional question or issues. I hope it'll be the will of the body to pass the bill.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 63, noes 33.
Ayes 63, noes 33. The bill is passed.
House Bill 332, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to concealed handgun permits, judges.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 0.
Ayes 97, noes 0. The bill is passed.
House Bill 766, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to carrying concealed handguns, protective orders.
Gentlewoman from Alexandria, Ms. Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the bill.
Gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll speak briefly for everyone. Yesterday, I did listen intently to the debate on the floor, and there was a lot of talk and insinuation about helping women victims get a protective order. Mr. Speaker, the only people involved in the debate yesterday were not women, but it was men. So I figure that today is a good day to hear a voice of a woman on this issue. First, we need to be clear that protective orders are for everyone. This is not an issue of gender. Second, there are instances where a judge will issue a protective order for two parties, for both parties. So as a consequence of this bill, we can have two people taking advantage of what is intended to protect one victim, given the rhetoric that was on the floor. Third, there is the issue of training and funding. I realize the patron introduced a bill for training, and I just wanted to let every member of this body know that the bill actually was reported out of subcommittee with a recommendation that it be referred to appropriations, and so it still needs to go through full committee. Mr. Speaker, without the proper training for both the victim's own safety and the safety of the public, I don't know how we can pass this bill. I also don't know how we could take money away from programs that work, aim more toward women or not, intended for a feeling of safety holstered in a handbag or not. The very experts who help victims every day have come out against this. We need to protect programs that are based on medical and scientific research. And I hope that the men who are patroning this bill will consider this, because as of yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I saw no woman on the bill. Thank you.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 68, noes 29.
Ayes 68, noes 29. The bill is passed.
House Bill 865, a bill to provide for the submission to the voters of a proposed amendment to the Constitution of Virginia, adding in Article 10 a section numbered 6B relating to real property tax exemptions.
Shall the bill pass? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 0.
Ayes 97, noes 0. The bill is passed.
House Bill 144, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to special days, Indigenous Peoples Day.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 94, noes 3.
Ayes 94, noes 3. The bill is passed.
Turning to page 14 of the printed calendar, House Bill 106, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of Chapter 646 of the Acts of Assembly of 1968, which provided a charter for the town of Herndon in Fairfax County relating to boundaries and powers of the mayor.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 94, noes 1.
Ayes 94, noes 1. The bill is passed.
Continuing with today's calendar, House bills on second reading, uncontested calendar, page 14 of the printed version. House Bill 252 has been moved to the regular calendar. House Bill 928 has been taken by for the day. First up in the uncontested second reading block, House Bill 80, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to the effective date of the tax exemption for property certified as tax exempt by a state or local authority. Report from the Committee on Finance.
Shall the bill pass? Oh, we're on second reading. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Gentlewoman from Bedford, Ms. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 80 clarifies that the tax exemption for pollution control equipment will take place when the equipment goes into operation and not when the actual certification comes through. I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 95, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to the addition to federal taxable income for dividends paid by a captive real estate investment trust. Report for the Committee on Finance.
Gentleman from Powhatan, Mr. Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, which came out unanimously from Commerce and Labor, is a bill which would very modestly amend the captive real estate investment trust procedure that we set in place back in, I think, 2007. Delegate Massey had that measure. What we intended to do was prevent people who were taking advantage of a new provision in the code for real estate investment trusts, and they were putting their own property for example, a large big box as a way of avoiding taxes. What this does is takes out a very small section and allows it where you have an insurance company, for example, who invests in a real estate investment trust and allows that the exemption that was intended under the original federal tax code. It would bring it for Virginia. It has minimal to no fiscal impact, and I would also note that a number of local Virginia pension plans invest in this kind of a trust. Hope you will engross the bill and pass it along to its third reading.
House Bill 148, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to real property tax assessment. Date to fixed tax rate. Report from the Committee on Finance with an amendment.
The gentleman from Hanover, Mr. Fowler.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 148 simply allows local governments to, may I back up for a second, Mr. Speaker? Move the committee amendments.
Questions on adoption of committee amendments may in favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment's agreed to. Gentleman from Hanover.
Okay, as amended, Mr. Speaker, this House Bill 148 would allow local governments to move back the date that they fix their tax rates from April 15th until May 15th. I hope it'll be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Turning page 16 of the printed calendar, House Bill 279, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to teacher licensure, Virginia STEM adjunct faculty licenses. Report from the Committee on Education with a substitute.
The gentleman from Bedford, Ms. Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
The question is on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentlewoman from Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill would establish a Virginia Career and Technical Education Adjunct Faculty Provisional License and a renewable provisional license as well for qualified individuals in an area that is greatly needed for CTE courses. I hope it would be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
House Bill 398, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to sales and use tax refunds. Report from the Committee on Finance with a substitute.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 398 prohibits any taxpayer who fails to give a vendor a tax exemption certificate at the time of purchase from receiving interest on a refund claim for the period of time prior to the date the refund claim is made by the taxpayer. The bill actually saves the Commonwealth nearly $4 million over the next biennium. I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and move it on to its third reading.
House Bill 516, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to the Board of Education policy on sexually explicit instructional material. Report from the Committee on Education.
The gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 515 requires that the Board of Education establish a policy requiring each elementary and secondary school to do three things. First would be to notify parents of materials or literature that includes sexually explicit content. Second, permit the parent to review the materials or literature when requested. And three, provide alternative materials or literature when that does not include sexually explicit content, if requested by the parent. The board is actually developing these regulations now regarding this issue, but they have been delayed several times. So, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House Bill 1062, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to restructured financial and operational authority for certain public institutions of higher education.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is a technical amendment to statute. Restructuring, I think, was in 2005. It deals with your Tier 3 institutions, UVA, William & Mary, Virginia Tech, I think, and VCU. And this was something that we found in the interim that needed a technical amendment where it strikes just a few sections and it says replaces article with subchapter. So it's purely technical in nature. I'd ask that we engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
House Bill 1152, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to the local gas road improvement and Virginia Coalfield Economic Development Authority tax, use of revenues. Report for the Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Tazewell, Mr. Moorfield.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, House Bill 1152 comes at the request of Buchanan County. The bill amends the Gas Road Improvement Fund and the Virginia Coalfield Economic Development Authority tax to be used for the repair and enhancement of existing water lines. I move to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 1170, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to real property tax, boards of equalization. Report for the Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Hanover, Mr. Fowler.
Mr. Speaker, currently every Board of Equalization is composed of 3 to no more than 5 members. House Bill 1170 simply allows a local government to continue to appoint 3 to 5 members or a number equal to the local election districts in their locality, whichever is greater. I move that House Bill 1170 be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
Continuing with second reading uncontested, House Bill 1224, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to bank franchise tax. Report for the Committee on Finance with an amendment.
The gentleman from Powhatan, Mr. Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee amendment.
The question is on adoption of the committee amendments. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Powhatan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do want to correct one statement I made in my previous description of a bill. I said it was before the Commerce and Labor Committee. That bill, as this one, were before the Finance Committee. House Bill 1224 caps the bank franchise tax at $18 million annually per bank. This obviously affects only the largest banks in the Commonwealth. The cap would provide for them certainty and stability. And they have experienced some volatility in recent years due to varying capital requirements established by the federal government. Additionally, this bill would make Virginia more competitive with the Tar Heel state and could help attract more bank jobs to the Commonwealth. The cap is $7 million higher than the average annual tax payment of our 5 largest banks in the last few years. So there is not presently, and there is not in the foreseeable near future, a fiscal impact. There could, in fact, be a revenue upside if, in fact, this bill does attract additional businesses or investments to Virginia. I move that we engross the bill and pass it along to its third reading.
The gentleman from Roanoke City, Mr. Rasul.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentleman, and I let him know ahead of time about my question. We know that the bank franchise tax means a lot to localities, and I'm worried about the long-term implications because we know that there are new capital requirements coming down to ensure that our banks are solid. In looking at the bill, I did not see a mechanism, as there's no cap now, should we put the cap in place, a long-term mechanism to then increase the cap in the future. Is there a mechanism in place for us to do that, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I would say that there is a trigger actually in the text of the bill itself. If you take a look, and it's on lines 13 and following, if the 5 banks pay that maximum amount for 3 consecutive years, anytime after the year 2017, as determined by the Department of Taxation, then such maximum amount shall increase to $20 million beginning in the calendar year immediately following. I would note that a comparable review of what the current taxes are would find that those 5 largest banks in the Commonwealth today, on average for the last 3 years, have paid $10.7 million. So we're a long way, 68% below that $17 million cap.
Mr. Speaker, if we could move that to the regular calendar.
Without objection, after engrossment. House Bill 1224 to the regular calendar. After, right?
After is what he said. And House Bill 1331, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to withholding of income taxes related penalties. Report from the Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Accomack, Mr. Bloxham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1331 just moves the requirement for the date the W-2s are to be reported to the Virginia Tax Department to January 31st. It was already in the budget. This just conforms the code to the practice that is already occurring. I move we engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Shall the bills be engrossed and passed to third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bills are engrossed and passed to the third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House bills on second reading regular calendar. First up is House Bill 90 on page 11. House Bill 90 is a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to possession of handguns by members of the Virginia National Guard. The committee substitute was agreed to yesterday, February 2nd, and there is a floor amendment.
We need to reconsider
the yeah.
The
floor amendment to the already adopted committee substitute.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our news channels are rife with partisan rancor from Congress in Washington, D.C., but it's great to see that civility still exists here in Virginia. Yesterday, I stood on this floor debating the merits of House Bill 90 to allow our citizen soldiers to use their valid concealed carry permits to protect themselves. The vote came down largely on party lines, but however, I want to thank the initiative of Delegate Bell and frankly, all the other side of the aisle for working and coming together on what truly is a bipartisan bill and an important one so that citizen soldiers may better protect themselves, their families, and their peers. And I'll just say that the amendment simply adds a couple words in there saying mission impairment. So the commanders who believe that using concealed carry permits that could reasonably impair mission impairments are able to make the call not to use them. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I move that the body would engross and pass the third reading. I did it again, huh? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move the amendment first.
Okay. I'll call on the gentleman from Loudon first. Gentleman from Loudon, Mr. Bell.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Okay, let me do the amendment. I thought you were going to speak to the amendment. Questions on adoption of the floor amendment? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The floor amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Loudon, Mr. Bell.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill. Well, first, I'd like to say yesterday on this body, I spoke against this bill, and my opposition was based on circumstances I listed which could impair the mission in certain circumstances. I believe that this is a great example of good government. Immediately after our debate yesterday, I spoke with Delegate Taylor, and in goodwill and in a trusting fashion, he worked with me in a bipartisan way to and agreed to make this amendment. And I know he had a significant amount of trust pulling that bill out and bringing it up again. But I believe this resolves this issue, and actually I think it's a great sign of good government. I thank the gentleman for his willingness to work with me. And as I said yesterday, this is a bill I wanted to work for, or wanted to vote for, and now I can. And I'm going to ask all of my colleagues. There is a lot of love in the room. And I ask my colleagues to please join me in unanimously voting for this bill to support the National Guard members. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before I ask if the bill be engrossed, would anybody like to join me in a verse of Kumbaya? Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with second reading regular calendar, House Bill 518 has been taken by until tomorrow, February 4th. Next, House Bill 3 has been taken by until Monday, February 8th. Accordingly, House Bill 382, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the code relating to control of firearms by state agencies, rights of employees. Report Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute.
The gentleman from Hanover, Mr. Fowler.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
The question is on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. Barely.
All right, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, first let me tell you what House Bill 382 does and what it doesn't do. House Bill 382 prohibits state agencies from adopting regulations or rules that prohibit state employees from storing their lawfully possessed firearms in their locked, privately owned vehicle unless specifically authorized by statute. Passage of House Bill 382 does not allow state employees to lawfully possess firearms in the workplace. Mr. Speaker, I have many state employees in my district, and I do not believe that they should lose their right to lawfully possess their firearms during their commute to and from work. House Bill 382 provides a reasonable balance between right to carry and workplace safety. I hope that it will be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 20 of the printed calendar, House Bill 481, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to compliance with detainers, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Report from Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Speaker, I move the substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Prince William.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, House Bill 481 requires that if a locality releases an illegal alien from incarceration before the end of their normal term of incarceration, that locality may be sued by individuals injured or harmed by such alien for any acts committed by that individual through midnight of the day that they were originally scheduled to be released. Now, what is the background of this, Mr. Speaker? On July 1, 2015, Kate Steinle and her dad were walking on a crowded waterfront in San Francisco. Miss Steinle was shot by Sanchez Lopez, who was in America illegally and who had several prior felony convictions and who previously had been deported 5 times back to Mexico. The U.S. Immigration's Customs Enforcement Bureau had requested of San Francisco Sheriff Ross Mikarami that they detain Mr. Lopez for possible deportation. The sheriff declined to honor the detainer request from ICE because the city of San Francisco had a policy of providing such individuals with what they call sanctuary from federal request for deportation, and because the sheriff did not recognize ICE detainers as legal documents. Now, Mr. Speaker, what happened to Kate was that the bullet killed her. There was an interview on television that was both inspiring and sorrowful, and her dad was asked, "What did Kate say to you after she was shot?" She said, "Help me, Dad." And then she passed to the next life. Right now, in California, there's no way that any compensation or redress of grievance can be obtained. And there's a lawsuit, but it's probably not going to get anywhere. Now, is this a problem in Virginia? Well, Mr. Speaker, a release of a document from ICE, January 15th, 2016, by the Texas Tribune, discovered, and this was ICE documents, that in Virginia from January 1, 2014 to September 30, 2015, 29 individuals were released from 11 localities where the detainers had been declined. One of these localities has a policy of not honoring any detainer requests. It's a formal policy. Of the 29, 16 had prior criminal convictions. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General in Virginia in January of 2015 was asked the question, is a local agency required to honor an ICE detainer? Does it have discretion to honor it or not? Or alternatively, whether the agency is legally obligated to release the prisoner despite the receipt of the detainer? The answer was, in my opinion, that an ICE detainer is merely a request. Well, this would change that, Mr. Speaker. Doesn't require detention beyond the normal date of incarceration. But if you receive a request, you really should honor it within that time. If you decide not to honor it for whatever reason, then your locality is responsible, may be responsible, for up to $100,000 to an individual harmed by such individual released through midnight of the day that they would be normally released. That's the purpose of the bill, to provide some accountability, some responsibility, so that others who, God forbid, get in this circumstance may not be told to go away completely without any redress of grievance. I urge the measure to be engrossed and passed to third reading.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman why it is that his bill requires the director, the sheriff, or another official to take certain actions to comply with the detainers, yet in the liability paragraph, starting on line 23, the liability goes to the locality, the Board of Supervisors. So how is it that we're holding a local city council or a local Board of Supervisors liable for the actions of a sheriff, who in most cases, many cases, a constitutional officer acting independently of the policies of the Board of Supervisors or the City Council?
An individual citizen would have little authority or persuasive influence over a sheriff, because sheriffs receive money from localities by the governing body. There is the opportunity for influence to get the attention of the sheriff. Moreover, the sheriff represents that locality. The responsibility for such things should be placed with the governing body of the locality, not someone who is an executive in that locality.
The gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is unnecessary and overly costly to localities. The bill creates a very likely possibility of detaining individuals longer than they otherwise would be held pending trial, but for their immigration status. And this raises concerns about unlawful detainer. Local law enforcement officials already transfer individuals to federal custody when they're charged with felonious or violent offenses, when they are previously when they had previously been deported and returned illegally. These are the cases that ICE has an interest in. Traditionally, ICE has not taken into custody those individuals who may be here illegally but have not committed offenses that deem them to be dangerous or a risk to public safety. This bill does not identify the potential costs on local jails for detaining individuals who must wait to be notified by ICE whether a transfer to federal custody is going to occur, but there is definitely a fiscal impact on local jails. Finally, the Virginia Chiefs of Police also have serious concerns about a potential chilling effect on the immigrant population's willingness to report crimes and cooperate with police investigations, especially those whose only offense is their illegal presence under federal civil law. This makes all of us less safe in our homes and all of us less safe in our communities when crimes go uncommitted or go unreported. I hope the body will oppose HB 481 as unnecessary and overly costly for our localities and unnecessarily endangering our overall community.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Chairs in doubt. As many as favor the motion to engross past third reading, raise your right hand. That's good. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House Bill 770, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to conditional zoning, brought for the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there is a floor amendment to the committee substitute.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Shenandoah.
Mr. Speaker, I believe there's a floor amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report a floor amendment.
Floor amendment to the committee substitute offered by Delegate Dudenheffer. Line number 74, after the word costs on line 74, strike, as well as compensatory damages.
The gentleman from Stafford, Mr. Dudenheffer, to explain his floor amendment.
Mr. Chairman, speaking to the amendment. Mr. Speaker, I served on local government for 6 years, and I know the diligence that is put into many of the decisions that are made. I think the wording that's in the proposed bill is somewhat punitive and unnecessary, and it flies in the face of a good communication. I think it'll be counterproductive to the rest of the bill. So I ask that it be passed.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Speaking of the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
In the floor amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I would urge the body to accept the gentleman's floor amendment. I view it as a friendly amendment that settles a number of the concerns that existed about the substitute. So I would ask that we adopt the floor amendment.
Questions on adoption of the floor amendment? As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The floor amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Shenandoah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, essentially broad overview of what this bill does is it restores some equity, some fairness. It levels the playing field in the area of the ability of folks to build affordable housing in Virginia. It sort of restores the original intent of the proffer system, if you will, which was to identify the actual costs associated with a new housing development, things that were essential public services, things like schools, like roads, public police and fire rescue type services, things that were directly attributable to that new development coming into existence. Over the years, the proffer system has changed, and there are certain localities in Virginia that I think have allowed it to change significantly, maybe even to the point of being overly burdensome, certainly overly burdensome, in some cases potentially abusive. Proffers that are being asked for before rezoning occurs in the area of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 plus per unit. That might have been perfectly acceptable and something that folks could overlook back during the boom in 04, 05, 06. But we certainly don't live in that boom world anymore. And for someone to be asked to pay an additional $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 plus for a house, I think is entirely too burdensome in this day and age. So we're trying to restore that fairness that I spoke of. What the bill does is it revises the standard from something, I think in the code now it says roughly proportional. The nexus between the proffer being asked for, the things that are being desired by the county or the locality, and the development itself, that the services or the needs of the county, not the wants of the county, be that which is driving the proffer issuance, okay? So I liken it to wants and needs because it's things like museums, libraries, parks, other wants that are, Delegate Spruill has heard enough, that are being asked for by these localities. This bill simply limits it to things like those roads and police and fire. It does leave parks in the mix. To settle some other concerns on the other side, we have exempted on the other side of the other body down the hall has exempted certain high-density developments around like metro stations and things like that. I anticipate as this bill goes forward, we will be adopting that limitation on high-density areas, and I've given my word to folks who've asked about it on the other side that we intend to adopt those changes from the Senate. It gives the ability of home builders to go to court and force this reasonableness standard, essentially, and to recoup attorney's fees if they're found to be in the right. The delegate's amendment takes out compensatory damages because we don't really know what that might consist of, and that might flip the equation too far in the other direction. So we're certainly trying to achieve a balanced approach here. I think that's what the bill does, and I would move the bill be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
Gentleman Henrico, Mr. O'Bannon.
Mr. Speaker, would gentleman yield for a question?
Gentleman yield.
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the gentleman bringing the bill, and I'm actually supportive of many portions of the issues that he's delineated. I do have to say that I represent a locality that does not do cash proffers. And so my specific question on lines 52 to 54, would that not make it illegal or make it prohibitive for a developer to choose to come and say, I'll build with brick voluntarily as part of his proffer?
Mr. Speaker, I would answer the gentleman by saying, certainly, first of all, this is not my area of expertise, and I'm sure the gentleman knows that. I wish I had had time to answer his question before we took the floor on this issue. And of course, he certainly may have just noticed that aspect of the bill. Architectural proffers are part of the bill, so it does affect the gentleman's locality. I was going to get to that, but I saw flags waving on the other side. But I can't answer the gentleman's question specifically. I can certainly get the gentleman an answer by tomorrow, and we can certainly take it up again in debate should it become an issue.
Gentleman Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield? Question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly wouldn't want to impose an unreasonable requirement on a developer and then deny the application based on that unreasonableness. So I'm very sympathetic to the cause of the bill. My county opposes it, as several counties do, so that puts us in an uneasy position. And so the gentleman said that this will give a new forum, a new criteria in court to decide what reasonable and unreasonableness is. And if he could just explain how he sees that being fought out in court in maybe some fact situation. Possibly a developer wants to build voluntarily. This is not proposed by the county, but the county might like it. Something that's way off-site from where the housing development is, and the county might like it, but then denies the application, not based on that really good proffer, but based on other issues. And so what is the burden of proof? How do you see this playing out in a court of law?
Sure, and I'd answer the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, by saying that I think some of the concerns are actually counterintuitive. So the existing standard is costs that are roughly proportional or bear a reasonable relation to the proposed development. Everyone viewed that as sort of a vague and loose standard. So the issue in tightening the language is to create a new standard which is specifically attributable. It started out specifically and uniquely attributable, meaning the anticipated new costs associated with the construction for the locality to provide infrastructure. That uniquely was taken out because they viewed that as a little too specific. So specifically attributable would be the new standard. A locality would have to justify that the proffers they're asking for are specifically attributable to anticipated costs relating to that development. The gentleman mentioned a far-off development, maybe not close to any existing development, creating sprawl. I know that's a concern. However, you can imagine that if a developer had the intent to do that, to create this new sprawl far away from existing infrastructure and services, that they would be sort of falling into their own trap, if you will. That those costs would be quite specifically attributable to that new development. And if they were closer to existing infrastructure, to existing growth areas, it would be easier for them to say that only a portion of that new development should be, only a portion of the new costs should be attributable to that new development because there is existing infrastructure. So the notion that this is going to create far-off sprawl, I think, is sort of counterintuitive and misguided because they're going to be stuck with the whole bill, if you will.
I thank the gentleman.
Shall the bill be gross? Oh, I'm sorry. Gentleman Fairfax, Mr. Boulevard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I would be delighted to yield yet again, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I will yield.
Thank you. I do thank the gentleman. And, indeed, I think there are situations where there's one-on-one back and forth where you're dealing with off-site impacts with schools and with parks and the such. I guess my concern with this bill is that's really only part of the equation. Oftentimes there's a win-win with a locality and a developer where they're working together to be very creative in order to solve problems and to come up with a development such as Tyson's or Merrifield and the such. My specific question, though, Mr. Speaker, is on line 51. And so when we apply this unreasonable standard or unreasonableness standard, we also put some language in there that says that you don't have to remain subject to an agreement. And so my question is, if you have a developer that agrees, I guess voluntarily, to a proffered condition under this particular scenario, and the government moves it forward in good faith that, again, this is reasonable, does this open up a loophole for that developer to come back at a later date and say, never mind, I want out of all this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would answer the gentleman by saying certainly we view this as a work in progress. And the issue that was raised to me just now for the first time on the floor is yet another thing that I certainly hope to take into account as this legislation progresses. The bill has changed significantly in the Senate. It's changed here in the House, even on the House floor today. If there is anything like that the gentleman's concerned about, we can certainly work on that going forward. We are not trying to run the table on localities here. We are trying to restore fairness and equity to this process. And one can envision, much like in the movies where someone says, you can have your business in our neighborhood if you pay us. That's sort of how this works in the proffer system. You can build your house if you pay us. One can envision a circumstance where someone would have their arm twisted into an unreasonable proffer situation and later find out things about that deal that proved to be unreasonable that they did not know at the time. And so that's the reason that the legislation has that provision in it. I would also tell the gentleman and the body that, you know, there is one county, I have a copy of an official document from one county where their proffer fund that they've accumulated over the years, which when they accept these exorbitant proffers from developers, which is in theory supposed to offset all these costs that this locality is going to bear because of the new development. One locality has $126 million sitting in that fund, just sitting there earning interest. And I'm not sure when they're going to get around to paving that road or filling those potholes or hiring those extra police. But that's one of the many reasons we have the bill. And again, Mr. Speaker, I would hope the body would adopt, engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Chesapeake, Mr. Rule.
Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, to the members, this bill came before the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns. And it's a good bill, but you got to look at what was the main reasons for the bill in a way, besides getting to the particular points. This is where it comes from. It comes from that the localities now are saying they have a proffer for a certain thing. And what we found out was that now, because if the developer want to come in and develop a certain area, and they were saying that you could do this, but providing if you do this, it will be providing that you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Always build up the whole area, one a school, one stoplights and all. And they were asking for too much on what they were trying to do. One thing when they came before the committee also, that there was the development that came in, I believe, they had a fire station that was there. And then when it came into bill is that the locality wanted to make sure that everything that they asked for. So what they were saying is now that you want to come in and build something in my area, they want to do everything, put in all the roads, put in all the sewers, put everything in. So they're going way beyond the profit system. Getting back to Dr. Banner's question, what that was about is that you go into a locality, and the locality says that for this particular area, we want you to put in countertops. We want you to put in brick fronting. And so developers saying, why? If they do that, then it will be passed on to the person who is buying the house. That's where it comes from now. I'm trying to, Dr. Banner said in his area that they don't have proffers. And I'm not for sure that that would apply to this bill. But this is the good bill because we talked about that in the committee at length. So the question is this, because a locality says that when you come in and build these homes in this development, we want to make sure that you have all countertops a certain way. We want to make sure you have fireplaces. what happened. They say, but you can't do that because if you do that, the person that is buying the house is going to pass the cost on. So now we're talking about going to court. And because the locality was talking about going to court, Gibber was right because the kid was this. I apologize. I'll shut up, Gibber. Because you were right because the kids this to go to court, then they're saying because you came into court, we win, they want all the fees back. This is the good bill. I'm hoping we can pass the bill on.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Ms. Boysko.
Mr. Speaker, I speak to the bill.
Gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you so much. I spent years working in Fairfax County government, working with land use and transportation, doing planning around metro stations. So I feel like I have a close relationship with what's going on in this bill. I wanted to share with the body today a letter that came from Fairfax County to explain what the challenges are. And I'm just going to go to a paragraph. Though the bill only applies to residential development, that also includes residential components of mixed-use developments, as well as multifamily residential development, proffers for such development could only include public facilities improvements for schools, transportation, public safety. Under the current House version, parks would also be included. However, developers often tell us that they prefer flexibility to negotiate a wider range of items. This bill would limit that flexibility by prohibiting them from including libraries, workforce housing, and other public facilities in those negotiations. Passage of this legislation would severely hinder our ability, and that's Fairfax County talking, our ability to work with developers to address the concerns of our shared constituents. In addition, developers will negatively be impacted if they no longer have the flexibility to negotiate a wider range of proffered improvements because they may be precluded by this legislation from qualifying for density bonuses or similarly higher density redevelopment options in the county's comprehensive plan. As you know, the county has worked closely with industry and community stakeholders to amend our comprehensive plan as we continue to prepare for exceptional, innovative growth in the coming years. We have already seen success in the transformation of Tysons, which is the most publicized new development in the county. The House bill addresses the concerns about that area by exempting it from this legislation. However, Tysons is only one part of the county. We also continue to make progress in planning communities through transit-oriented development by enhancing the growth and success of our newer developments while revitalizing our older commercial areas, ensuring active and vibrant districts throughout Fairfax County. Virtually all development in the county is infill development. And in these types of cases, proffers are critical in meeting infrastructure and compatibility needs of surrounding areas. If enacted, these bills may require us to rewrite entire sections of our comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. We know that these new developments will augment the strong business climate we have already created, a business climate that will help us to attract and retain both Fortune 500 companies and entrepreneurial startups every year, benefiting the entire Commonwealth. Retaining our land use authority is essential to that effect, and we need your help to make that happen. Thank you so much.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with second reading regular, House Bill 812, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to establishing the Limited Residential Lodging Act penalty. Reports Committee on General Laws with a substitute, and that committee substitute and floor amendments thereto were both agreed to yesterday.
The gentleman from Hanover, Mr. Peace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 812 presents a modest framework designed in a narrowly tailored way to allow safe and legal enterprises to operate in Virginia. Virginia is experiencing a phenomenon in housing much like folks experienced with Uber last year. We have about 4,000 or more operators and homeowners using web-based hosting platforms such as Flipkey or Airbnb, but they need guidance that this bill provides. Virginia homeowners who want to exercise their private property rights may do so subject to certain health, safety, and welfare requirements, but for no more than 30 days consecutively and for only dwelling purposes. Supported by the Virginia Chamber, this bill is a win-win for Virginia homeowners and localities. The bill establishes a central collection and remittance tax structure within the Virginia Department of Tax. Tax has been engaged in the development of this legislation from its inception and has embraced the verification or auditing of the taxpayer, which in most cases will be that platform, the hosting platform, who will step into the shoes of the homeowner taxpayer and as the guest pays the taxes at the booking. The taxes will be collected, and it's assured in this bill that all retail sales and use and transient occupancy taxes will be collected, sent to central tax department, and then remitted back to localities dollar for dollar. The bill adds additional optional health, safety, and safeguards and makes clear that the underlying zoning does not change. It also doesn't interfere with existing contracts, such as homeowners' covenants or leasehold agreements, which likely already prohibit subleases. The bill creates and defines certain terms of art, such as a booking transaction, a hosting platform, defines limited lodger, limited residential lodging, limited lodging operator, operators, and primary resident. And the amendments we adopted yesterday make further clear that it is your primary residence, the principal place of residence and domicile, further narrowing the location of these uses. It also allows for noise ordinances, signage and parking, caps the number of guests that are allowed and the times when they may be allowed. It has specific penalties for noncompliance, requires a certain amount of insurance for these purposes. The bill has a delayed effective date to allow the tax department to set up its structure, and it has a further enactment clause to address the concept that has come up through the negotiations with localities and with industry where illegal hotels are a concern. The multifamily structures or the second homes, the vacation rentals that might be outside of this bill but still would be regulated in localities would have the ability to regulate those industries. So the enactment clause will allow for a study to set a course for how to design that structure. We've heard talk about the status quo this morning. Obviously, the status quo can't continue because if we don't have this legislation, these operators will be existing without the structures that are so important in this bill. There's nothing certain has changed, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. As we've heard this morning, the people of Virginia are no longer willing to embrace that status quo, and this bill will help embrace the innovative economies that exist in the 21st century, and ask the bill to be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 22, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to the expiration of the political candidate contribution tax credit. Report for the Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, House Bill 22 does what the title describes, puts a sunset. Beginning next year, this credit will no longer exist. I didn't believe that taxpayers of Virginia should be subsidizing any political contribution of any kind, and so the bill ends it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 23, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the code relating to refunds of fuels taxes paid by certain nonprofit entities organized with a principal purpose of providing hunger relief services or food to the needy. Report of Committee on Finance with amendments.
Gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Farrell.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adoption of the committee amendments.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to. The gentleman from Henrico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this adds to already a long list of very specific, narrow instances when a nonprofit, when delivering food to folks in need with an owned vehicle by that entity, just for the miles they use to deliver that food, will get a refund on their gas tax. It's minimal impact to the state, did not require a budget amendment, and there is no additional cost for tax to enforce this refund. So I would move the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 22 of the printed calendar, House Bill 138, a bill to amend and reenact the fifth enactment of Chapter 767 of the Acts of Assembly of 2013, as amended by Chapters 738 and 742 of the Acts of Assembly of 2014, relating to the Virginia Beach Arena. Report of Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Knight.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 138 extends a sunset clause. Virginia Beach has entered into a contract for construction of an arena. This arena shall end when the bonds issued mature, or the city's contract with the arena expires, or 2050, whichever comes first. The original date was 2043. We need a little bit more time, so we moved it to 2050. Mr. Speaker, I move the House engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 182, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to transient occupancy tax, Frederick County. Report from the Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Loudoun, Mr. Minshew.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 182 adds Frederick County up in the valley to the list of 50 counties that have the authority to levy a transient occupancy tax. And, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the bill be engrossed and be sent forward to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 328, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia related to transient occupancy tax, Botetourt County. Report from the Committee on Finance with a substitute.
The gentleman from Botetourt, Mr. Austin.
Mr. Speaker, I move adopt substitute.
The questions on adoption of the committee substitute, as many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Botetourt.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 328 is a transient occupancy tax bill. This bill allows a 2% increase in the transient occupancy tax, and the proceeds of this increase will go to the Roanoke Convention and Visitors Bureau to help promote the new Virginia Mountain region. I ask the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading. Thank you.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 357, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to public schools physical activity requirement. Report from the Committee on Education.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. DePasse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 357 establishes a minimum of 20 minutes of physical activity for students in grades K through 5, which can be satisfied with recess. There's no opposition from any education stakeholders. I move the House to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Could I ask the House to come to order, please? Thank you. I don't want to have to move them up to the gallery. We're back on House Bill 357. Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will. Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Langenfelder.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, the patrons' objectives here are, I think, sincere, and I understand what he's trying to do. I think most of us would agree that when you look at some of the health-related issues among young people, that obesity and physical exercise are issues we should focus on. My concern about this bill is not that we're asking young kids to do exercise. My concern is what we're asking kindergarten teachers and young school teachers to do, yet one more thing, one more activity in a day that is jam-packed with tons of things that young school teachers need to deal with. All school teachers need to deal with. Now, you will be told that this bill doesn't require any bookkeeping, doesn't require any real special things. I mean, you can count recess toward the 20 minutes. You can count walking to the
to the cafeteria as part of it. And if any of you guys have seen kindergartners, there's nothing but activity going on with them all day long. And so my concern is we mandate these things that I believe truly should be the prerogative of localities. And there is no bookkeeping requirement in this bill yet. That's next year's bill. That's the bill that will follow that says, well, we're not real sure that we're accounting for this 20 minutes. So let's have a report. We're great about that stuff here. We pass report bills all the time. We're going to report this. We're going to track this. We're going to have metrics. And so my opposition to this bill is not that I don't think that the kids need physical activity. They do. They also need parents who will turn off the television and read to them and do the kinds of things that young kids need, not only to be physically healthy, but mentally healthy as well, and prepared for the schoolwork. And so my opposition is not to the gentleman's good intentions. It is yet one more thing that we're putting on the backs of teachers to do. And that's what I wanted to say. I thank the Speaker.
Gentleman Suffolk, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I don't question my friend's intent on this bill. However, this is the quintessential nanny state bill. This is centralized, top-down dictating of how the local school boards will even conduct to the number of minutes of recess. And, you know, if we truly believe in empowering our local citizens, empowering our local school boards at government at its lowest level, decisions like these are best left at that level. I oppose this bill not for recess or playing, but oppose it as another example of a centralized authority removing the power from our citizens at the lowest level. Thank you.
Gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. LaPasi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking the bill.
You better.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Speaker, whether or not you think it's nanny state, whether or not you think that it's us dictating, you know, we do that all the time. We do it all the time. It's kind of like what you think is most important. So you got House Joint 1, you're going to be dictating. And so, you know, it's sort of like beauty. It's in the eyes of the beholder. I had 20 people sitting in my office last year, and they told me in a lot of places in the state, they don't even let them go out for recess. That's ridiculous, okay? In order for kids to learn, they got to get out and move around a little bit. So I can appreciate what the gentleman who just communicated said, and I understand what Delegate Ligenfelter said. He said that in the lower, in the committee, and he was one amongst two people that voted against this bill. All right? If you go to jail, they let you get an hour a day of exercise. But we're saying you can't get 20 minutes in school, and I think that's wrong.
House will come to order. House will come to order. Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with second regular, House Bill 487. A bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to School Resource Officers Grant Program, School Resource Officers. Conditions of employment. Report for the Committee on Education.
The gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 487 relieves school resource officers employed under the School Resource Officers Grant Program from the obligation to enforce school board rules and codes of conduct so they can focus their resources on law enforcement, security, and preventing violence and truancy as they are required to do by the code and consistent with their training from the Department of Criminal Justice Services. This bill is supported by the education stakeholders and the chiefs of police, and I move that we engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 515, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to public institutions of higher education, efforts to stimulate economic development. Report for the Committee on Education with a substitute.
Gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first I'd like to move the adoption of the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Augusta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 515 would require each public institution of higher education to annually report to the Governor, the General Assembly, and now the State Council of Higher Education the institution's contributions related to their efforts for economic development. This new report would be included as part of the institution's 6-year plan. And Mr. Speaker, I move the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 24 of the printed calendar, House Bill 557, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to school efficiency reviews, scope and cost. Report for the Committee on Education.
Gentleman from Carolina, Ms. Rock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 557 simply codifies what has been the current practice under budget language for the past 2 years as it relates to school operational efficiency reviews. This has nothing to do with the academic review process. Hope it be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 590, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to research and development expenses tax credit, a reporting requirement. Report for Committee on Finance with a substitute.
Gentleman Franklin, Mr. Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the body, House Bill 590 is a government efficiency bill. This legislation would shift the reporting requirement of the R&D tax credit annual data from the Virginia Economic Development Partnership to the Department of Taxation. Now, why do we want to do that? The Department of Taxation administers the program and currently reports the annual data in the Tax Commissioner's report on revenue collections by tax source. Mr. Speaker, I would move we engross this bill and pass it to the third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 596, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia, repeal another relating to recordation tax exemption. Report for the Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, this House Bill 596 is a tax cut bill. This bill eliminates the 50-cent per deed tax on deeds of partition and deeds pursuant to a decree of divorce and makes them exempt from taxation completely. I move the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 742, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to eligibility for Neighborhood Assistance Program tax credits. Report for the Committee on Finance.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I think some of us here are aware of the Neighborhood Assistance Program tax credit program that allows people who give money to help low-income folks get a tax credit for the value of their donation. Now, a couple of years ago, we tightened up the program so that we would make it only eligible for programs that offered help to low-income people. In the process, we inadvertently disqualified some groups that were providing a pretty useful service for a long period of time to low-income folks. So what this bill does, and we changed, I think it was last year or the year before, we modified the program to get the Catholic diocese back in because they were excluded because of what we had done several years before. What this bill does is make a small technical correction that will allow at least one group that was getting these tax credits back years ago to requalify under the law. I hope it would be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it along for third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 942, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the code relating to school property, reasonable access by youth groups federally listed as patriotic and national organizations. Report for the Committee on Education.
The gentleman from Rockingham, Mr. Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 942 does require local school boards to provide reasonable access to youth organizations that have a federal charter as patriotic and national organization for purposes of speaking with students and providing them with written materials. This would be during the school day. Mr. Speaker, some of these groups that are listed that specifically deal with our youth are the Boy Scouts, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the Girl Scouts, Boys and Girls Club of America, FFA, and Little League Baseball, and the Naval Sea Cadet Corps. And Mr. Speaker, now what this access would mean, I would picture that the school boards would allow, much like our press, that they're over here on the side, they have access. You can stop and talk to them if you'd like, or you can pass by them. And so that's the idea. There is no instructional time here. They simply would have a presence in our schools. And I move the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Lopez.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman rise for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I had asked the gentleman just a very direct question. Are there current issues where schools are letting these patriotic clubs or not letting these patriotic clubs have access in Virginia?
Mr. Speaker, I would respond to the gentleman, yes, there are.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman yield for another question?
Gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Speaker. Could the gentleman tell us exactly where in Virginia? And who? And which groups?
Mr. Speaker, the locations, the list that I have are Montgomery County, no access. Roanoke County, no access. Campbell County, no access. Amherst County, no access. Appomattox County, no access. Portsmouth City, no access. Chesapeake, no access. Should I continue on, Mr. Chair?
No, Mr. Speaker, that is a good list.
And Mr. Speaker, I would say there's more.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 951, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the Code of Virginia relating to the Department of Taxation, disclosure of certain tax information. Report to the Committee on Finance.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Keene.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this bill was requested to us from the Department of Taxation to do two things that involve the disclosure section of the tax code. One is a scenario where if you are an employee, a worker who has to file taxes at the end of the year or beginning of the year, you have all your documentation ready, you file it, but the tax department hasn't processed it yet, and there might be a delay. So you might call the tax department to see what's going on, why is my tax refund delayed? There are limits on what the tax department can tell you as a taxpayer, what they can and cannot tell you about your own records. One of the limits that they have is that they cannot tell you about anything that, even if it involves your records, if somebody else has a document, they can't tell you about that. The scenario here is when your employer has not submitted the W-2 form that they're supposed to file in time, the tax department can't tell you that it's not your fault, it's your employer's fault, but they can't tell you that because under the code, under the laws today, our tax disclosure rules are so strict. So what this would do is provide a narrow exception so that the tax department can tell you, well, sir, the reason why we're delaying your tax refund is because your employer hasn't filed his or her paperwork. And that's the limited amount of information that we're allowing them to do so that the taxpayer has more benefit of information. The second provision in the bill also deals with the same code section, but has nothing to do do with what I just said. This section deals with the providing the information on cigarette stamping to the law enforcement as they request the federal, state, and local in an effort to try to cut down on counterfeit cigarette sales. And so with that, I'd ask the body to engross the bill and pass on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 1017, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to education and improvement scholarship tax credits. Report to the Committee on Finance with an amendment.
The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the committee amendment.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendment. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Henrico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 1017, at the request of the Department of Education and some of our scholarship foundations, makes technical changes to the education improvement scholarship legislation. Mr. Speaker, specifically, it brings everybody on their reporting down to the same year as of June 30th. We had a lot of different scholarship foundations reporting on their own fiscal years, so this is going to make DOE's life a lot easier. And it also increases from 20 to 40 days, the number of days by which a scholarship foundation is required to return a pre-authorization notice. Some of our scholarship foundations were struggling under that time. It also increases from 14 to 21 days, the number of days by which a scholarship foundation must convert a donation of marketable securities into cash. Some of our broker-dealers were slowing the process down, just gives everybody a little more time. And then finally, Mr. Speaker, the amendment, if you don't use all your money, we were penalizing you 2-to-1. So whatever money you didn't use, we penalized you 2-to-1. We just moved the penalty down to 1-to-1, Mr. Speaker. Those are the highlights of the bill, and I would move that the bill be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 1147 has been taken by until Monday, February 8th. Accordingly, House Bill 1194, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to transient occupancy tax, Bedford County. Report from the Committee on Finance.
The gentleman from Botetourt, Mr. Austin.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 1194 is a transient occupancy tax bill. The bill allows a 2% increase in the transient occupancy tax, and the proceeds of the increase will go to the Regional Tourism Organization to help promote the new Virginia Mountain region. I ask the bill be engrossed and move to its third reading. Thank you.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Returning to page 14 of the printed calendar, page 14, House Bill 252, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to assistant speech-language pathologist duties. Report from the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there is a floor substitute offered by Delegate Corey as well.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Ms. Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the floor amendment in the nature of a substitute.
We need to reject the committee substitute first.
Oh, so sorry. I'd like to reject the committee substitute.
Well, really, we've got to do the floor substitute before we can do the committee substitute.
Mr. Speaker?
I'm just kidding.
Oh, this bill has been through so much.
We're doing the committee substitute. Those in favor of accepting the committee substitute will say aye. Those opposed, no. Committee substitute is rejected. The question now is on the adoption of the floor substitute. As many as favor of adoption of the floor substitute will say aye. Those opposed, no. Floor substitute is agreed to. Gentleman from Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg the body's support of this iteration of this bill, which has been through a lot of pain and agony, and we finally agreed, all the stakeholders, that this is the way to proceed. This bill will create the opportunity to have a new career and technical education path, which would be speech and language pathologist assistant. This is only one step on the way towards that, but this allows the Board of Speech and Language and Audiology to look at the possibility of licensure and report its findings to the Honorable Chairman of the Health and Welfare and Institutions Committee.
Ayes and nays on the Honorable Chairman. Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, resolutions, regular calendar, House Joint Resolution 1's been taken by until next Monday, February 8th. Therefore, that completes today's calendar.
Does the clerk have any additional announcements or communications?
No communications, just today's meeting schedule. Appropriations Committee will meet 1/2 hour after adjournment of the House over in the 9th floor appropriations room of the GAB. The Courts of Justice Committee will meet a 1/2 hour after adjournment of the House on the 1st floor in House Room C. Then the Criminal Law Subcommittee will meet 1/2 hour after adjournment of the full committee in House Room C. That's a change in time for Courts Criminal Sub. The Courts Civil Law Sub will meet 1/2 hour after adjournment down in House Room 1 here in the Capitol.
Mr. Speaker.
If the clerk might suspend, I got some people stand up, want to change plans on us. The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib.
If you have a bill in Civil Sub, you got to notice that we're meeting in the Capitol in House Room 1. If Finance is done, when Courts finishes, we'll be meeting in House Room D. If it's not done, we're going to come back over to the Capitol.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Bell.
The Criminal Law Subcommittee will meet immediately upon the adjournment of the full Courts of Justice Committee.
Okay.
The court sorted out. The Finance Subcommittee number 1 will meet 1/2 hour after adjournment of the House in House Room D. That is a change in time. Or not?
Gentleman bow down, Mr. Ware.
That subcommittee will be 1 hour after adjournment.
Okay.
Okay, and then the Agriculture, Chesapeake and Natural Resources Subcommittee will meet at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock in 8th floor West Conference Room. County, Cities, and Towns Subcommittee number 2 will meet at 4 o'clock up in the 7th floor West Conference Room. Finance Subcommittee number 2 will meet at 4 o'clock in the 5th floor East Conference Room. It's a change in time for Finance Subcommittee number 2. Transportation Committee Subcommittee number 4 will meet at 4 o'clock in 5th floor West Conference Room. The Health, Welfare, and Institutions Subcommittee number 3 will meet at 5 o'clock in the 4th floor West Conference Room. This is a change in location for HWI Sub 3. Then finally today, Rural Caucus will meet at 5 o'clock in the 3rd floor East Senate Conference Room. Looking ahead to tomorrow morning, Thursday, February 4th, Transportation Subcommittee number 3 will meet at 7 a.m. in House Room C. Transportation Sub 3 at 7 o'clock. Also at 7 tomorrow, the Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus will meet up in the Speaker's 6th floor conference room. The Militia, Police, and Public Safety Committee, Subcommittee number 2 meeting tomorrow is canceled. So then at 8 o'clock, Hampton Roads Caucus will meet in the Speaker's GAB Speaker's Conference Room. Then the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions, they will meet at 8:30 in House Room D across the hall. Transportation Committee will meet at 8:30 in House Room C. The Health, Welfare, and Institutions Subcommittee number 3 will meet tomorrow immediately upon adjournment of the full committee. That's an additional meeting for HWI Subcommittee number 3. HWI Subcommittee number 2 tomorrow will not meet. That meeting is canceled. The Appropriations Public Safety Subcommittee will meet at 10 o'clock tomorrow up in the 9th floor Appropriations Room. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Democratic Caucus meet tomorrow at 11:30 a.m.
Mr. Speaker, the House Democratic Caucus will meet at 11:15.
Democratic Caucus will meet at 11:15 down in House Room 2, and the Republican Caucus tomorrow morning will meet at 11:30 a.m. in House Room 1. That completes the announcements I have at this time.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move when the House adjourn today to adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox moves that when the House adjourn today to adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon. Many in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now adjourn.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox, moves the House to now adjourn. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The House stands adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow.